Hello there, and welcome back to Hydroponics Daily, your go-to podcast for everything soilless cultivation. I'm your host, Dr. Russell Sharp, and today I'm going to talk about a research paper that I have discovered, which is really interesting. And while it doesn't mention hydroponics anywhere in the paper, I think it could be really critical in making indoor growing even more efficient and potentially profitable in the future. Now, it's not something that's going to be practical and applicable this year. It would require genetically modifying crops. So if this is something you are vehemently against, switch off now and don't listen to the episode. If it's something you're cool with and you're happy to listen to potential benefits of GM crops, then do continue listening. As I say, my opinion on GM crops is it's a technology. It's neither evil nor bad. It depends how you use it. You can use it to create toxins and poisons, or you can use it to help increase food production. And as the paper says, really at the start, it says, by 2050, relative to 2010, we will need 56% more food produced for the increase in the global population. So it's a big area that needs to be studied. And the paper is all about increasing the rate and the amount of photosynthesis in crops. And when this started coming about, and this was a big thing about 2008, 2010, when this really started to really get mainstream funding and things like this, I always thought, but plants have evolved over millions of years to be efficient. Surely they are already super efficient at photosynthesis. Turns out that's not the case. And especially with increased CO2 levels in the atmosphere, plants haven't evolved recently for that. And while we do breed plants, we don't evolve plants, so we don't introduce new things. And so there's potential there to increase photosynthesis, and a number of different processes where they've tweaked enzymes involved in photosynthesis or introduced new enzymes for photosynthesis and things like this have resulted in increased levels of photosynthesis in crop plants. And you've got to remember, a crop plant hasn't evolved to produce a crop for you. It's evolved to survive in the natural world where its aims are different to your aims. And so there is potential to manipulate that. And this paper is really interesting, and I'll go into the details why. It's talking about utilizing a different part of the spectrum that plants currently don't use for photosynthesis. So in the previous episode, I talked about red to far red ratios and how they're really critical in shaping plant morphology. And I said that plants don't use, the 720 nanometer far red, or anywhere between 700 and 800 nanometers. That deep dark red that you can barely see, that normally just goes straight through the leaves, isn't absorbed, and is a signal to the plants that they're being shaded. Now, they can't utilize it for photosynthesis, and so it goes straight through. The chlorophylls, A, B, C, don't absorb it. Phytochrome, the sensor for shading, does absorb it, but only a very, very small amount. And so it's completely useless. It's lost light, and it's a significant part of light. Now, plants do absorb most of the visible spectrum, but not that part. Now, there are some organisms on Earth that can photosynthesize in the 700 to 800 nanometer range of light, but they're not plants. They are cyanobacteria, or algae, or blue-green algae as they used to be called. We don't call them blue-green algae because they're not related to seaweeds and other types of algae like that, the macroalgae, or even the diatoms, things like this. So they're a bit like bacteria that can photosynthesize. And the reason they can use this 700 to 800 nanometer light is because they contain other types of chlorophyll, particularly chlorophyll D and chlorophyll F. I should introduce this paper, actually. It's a paper by Wang et al. In Nature Communications, and it was published this year, so it's bang up to date. And you can find it as I said, in Nature Publications. I found it because it's by Professor Stephen Long of Lancaster Environment Centre, and I was dicking around on the Lancaster Environment website, and I found all his papers. And of all the researchers at the Lancaster Environment Centre, where I used to work, his papers were really interesting. So I thought I'd go through, and this one really stood out as a potential topic to talk about. So as I say, chlorophyll D and chlorophyll F, they can absorb light between 700 and 800 nanometers in the far red region. And these this cyanobacteria probably live deep down in ponds or in the sea, probably, and get the light that the other algae, the other phytoplankton and things haven't been able to absorb. So if you just fed them far red lights in a lab in the dark, they'd be able to photosynthesize. Now, what would happen if you introduced those chlorophylls into plants? Could they photosynthesize and would they grow better? And that is the aim of this paper. It didn't actually do that, but it just mathematically modeled the effects of that in soybean crops, because soybean is obviously one of the big 4 crops in the world. And it found, yes, if you did include these chlorophylls, then the way the plant would grow, its architecture, the way the light would be absorbed, the natural spectrum in the field, it would increase photosynthesis and biomass production by up to 26%, which is massive when it comes to plant growth. Now, that's not why I'm interested in it. I'm interested in it from two specific areas where I think it could actually be exploited even more. And that's because LED lights in the far red region are far, far cheaper to produce than LED lights in, say, the blue spectrum. So if we could have crops that could absorb far red light, potentially you could grow them indoors under far red lights for a fraction of the cost. Now, I'm not sure about the running costs of normal grow lights compared to a far red grow light. I'm not an expert when it comes to LED lighting. If anyone out there is, then that would be really interesting, because there are a whole host of different variables you have to consider. But there is potential there for growing plants under LED far red light in hydroponics, and potentially you would have less issues with environmental control. They wouldn't produce so much heat and things like this. You could potentially grow different types of crops indoors if they had this chlorophyll D and chlorophyll F in them. Now, obviously, you're not going to be able to do that without genetically modified crops, but it's still interesting from a scientific perspective to think about what are the potentials for introducing these into plants, or even for growing far red cyanobacteria and harvesting the biomass or harvesting interesting chemicals from them, growing them indoors under far red lights. Now, the other area of application, which isn't mentioned in the paper, and I'm sure they've thought about, but is, could you use it for companion planting and growing more than one crop in the field? There is a big area now in agriculture where we have things like boats, where farmers grow beans, then oats, or they grow an understory of clover and then grow a crop through it to allow, for various reasons. Sometimes it's to get 2 crops, other times just to add biomass to the soil. Now, the reason this is of interest to that is because imagine you've got one crop that's grown really low, and then you've got maize growing above it, maybe a 2-meter tall maize crop. Obviously, the maize crop's going to be absorbing the red light, the blue light, the yellow light, and letting all the far red light go through. And normally nothing would grow on the bottom. Even the weeds get suppressed. If you think about hemp crop, a hemp field, there's very little weeds in a hemp field because there's so much biomass, so much of the red light. There's no red light for the weeds to actually absorb. So even the shade-tolerant plants couldn't absorb that. But if you had a crop plant that was genetically modified to have chlorophyll D and F in it, and it could photosynthesize, then you could grow that under a canopy of maize and potentially get 2 crops. Something to consider, something to theorize about at the very least. You don't have to actually go and actually genetically modify the crop and do it. You can still think about it. And so I think there's 2 really good applications. One is potential for including it and increasing the efficiency of indoor crops by including chlorophyll C, D and F, and the potential for using multiple crops in a field, in a multi-cropping system. Multi-cropping is very popular in Cuba and places like that, where labour is cheap and tractor petrol is very high. Not so popular in areas like the UK, where you struggle to maintain both crops, and you have to have very highly regulated about what pesticides you can apply to each crop and when you can apply them and things like that. It gets very complicated to do it in the UK. But yeah, if we're looking at an understory crop and a canopy crop, this potentially could be a way forward for this, for dual use of a field. Okay, so very interesting area. If you want to check out the paper, I shall add it to the show notes. And yeah, as I say, it's by Wang et al. Wang is from the School of Life Sciences in Nanjing in China. So shout out to him. I think he's also, he or she, can't tell if that's a male or female name, from the Carl Rose Institute of Genomic Biology in the University of Illinois. So shout out Illinois as well. Okay. Thank you very much for listening. It's been a scientific one today, but really interesting one, I think. And perhaps we'll revisit some of the just pure scientific papers that have got some interest to hydroponics, even if it's not, built, this is how you set up a grow tent, or this is how you feed nutrients or add nutrients, or this is how the best way to grow a crop. I still think it's interesting, and I'm sure you do too. So until tomorrow, that's been Hydroponics Daily. And as always, go and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps grow the podcast unbelievably. You wouldn't believe how important it is, Apple Podcast reviews, to grow the show, because it will snowball once we get a fair few of those on there. Brilliant. Thank you very much. I do appreciate it. See you tomorrow. Goodbye.